4th grade. Today we're going to be practicing rounding to help us estimate in multiplication. And remember, it's so important to be able to estimate because that's a great way of checking your answer or being able to do math quickly in your head in a real life situation. Okay? So let's quickly review the rule of rounding. The rounding rule is that if the number is 5 or greater, you round up. If the number is less than 5, you round down. And the reason for this is because if you look at a number line, okay, you want to get to the closest side. So if a number, say the number is 7, 7 is much closer to 10 than it is to 0. So you would round up to 10, okay? 2 is much closer to 0 than it is to 10. So you would round down to 0. So that's just a quick review of rounding. Well, if you're looking at a 2-digit number, like 53, 53 is obviously not between 0 and 10 like our last number line. 53 is in between 50 and 60, and we're trying to figure out which it is closer to, okay? Well, if we looked at a number line, 55 would be our midway point. So we know that 53 falls in between 50 and 55. Therefore, it is closer to 50, so we would round 53 back down to 50. So whatever this number is, that's what you're rounding down to. You wouldn't round down to 40, right, because 53 is not close to 40. It's in between 50 and 60, okay? So we would round this to 50. Another way that you do it if you don't have a number line to look at is if you're rounding to the nearest tens place, you always want to underline the tens place, and then you look at its neighbor. This is the number that's going to tell you whether you're going to round up or down. Okay, so this 3, we know our rule. If it's less than 5, we round down. So this 3 tells us we round back down to 50. Let's look at another number. Let's look at 78. Well, 78 is in between 70 and 80. So we need to decide, is it going to round back down to 70, whatever that number is, or round up to 80, okay? Well, if we were looking at a number line, here 75 is our midway point, 78 would be about here. So that's much closer to 80, so we should know that we're going to round up to 80. But if we don't have a number line to look at, we're going to underline the place that we're rounding to. We're rounding to the nearest 10. And again, we look at that neighbor. If that neighbor is a 5 or greater, then we're rounding up. So since this is an 8, we know that it's greater than 5. So we're going to round up to 80. So in this chapter, you're going to be asked to use rounding to help you estimate. And so say, for example, you had a problem like 78 times 32. You're going to have to round both of these numbers to the nearest 10 and then multiply, okay? So 78, we need to round to the nearest 10. Well, we just did that one, right? We looked at the neighbor, the 8 tells us to round up to 80. So we're going to round 78 to 80. And then 32, okay, we're rounding to the nearest tens place. We look at the neighbor 2. We know that 2 is less than 5, so we're rounding down to 30. Keep in mind, always remember, 32 is in between 30 and 40, okay? So now we have 80 times 30 to solve. That's much easier, especially if we remember the zeros rule. The zeros rule tells us the number of zeros in the factors must match the number of zeros in the product, okay? So let's remember that this is a factor, right here, 80 is a factor, and 30 is a factor. So however many zeros are in our factors, that's how many zeros need to be in our product, which is the answer to a multiplication problem, okay? All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to cross these zeros out. We're going to pretend they're not even there. And then now we're left with our fast fact. 8 times 3 is 24. Easy peasy. But then we need to remember our zeros rule. The number of zeros in our factors must match the number of zeros in our product. Since we count 1, 2 zeros in our factors, we need to add 1, 2 zeros to our product. So 80 times 30 is 2,400. Okay, so we rounded to help us estimate. We rounded 78 times 32 is about 80 times 30, which is 2,400. So I know that seemed like a lot of steps, but we're really just applying a lot of the rules that we've already learned this year. So you're kind of putting them all together, which is a great thing. Okay, so let's look at another example. We're going to round to estimate. So we're going to round each of these numbers to the nearest 10. So what I do is I'm going to underline my tens place, and I'm going to look at the neighbor. The neighbor is a 2, so that tells me I'm going to round down to 60. For 59, I'm going to underline the tens place, and I'm going to look at that neighbor. This neighbor is a 9. A 9 is much greater than 5. It tells me I'm going to round up to 60. Okay? So now I have a new problem, which is 60 times 60. And I'm going to think about my zeros rule, and I'm going to remember, oh, I can just cross these off and worry about them later. Now I'm left with my fast fact. 6 times 6 is 36. Okay? And I remember that I need to add 1, 2 zeros into my product, because that's how many zeros were in my factor. Okay? So 62 times 59 is about 3,600. We just rounded to estimate. Well, sometimes you're going to have problems that look different. So for example, you might ask yourself, what if the numbers that I'm multiplying don't have the same number of digits? Okay, and that's pretty common. So the rule for this...
Okay, so what if you get a problem where your two numbers that you're multiplying have a different number of digits, right? They go to a different place value. So for example, 376 times 22. You're asking yourself, where are we going to round both of these numbers? Okay, well the answer is you round each number to its greatest place value. So if you look at 376, the greatest place value is the hundreds place. So we're going to round this number to the nearest hundred. 22, its greatest place is the tens place. So we're going to round 22 to the nearest 10. Okay, so let's do that right now. Underline the number, look next door. 5 or higher, add 1 more. So 7 is definitely higher than 5, so that 3 is going to become a 4. From the arrow on, change to zeros. So if we rounded 376 to the nearest 100, the nearest 100 is 400. Okay, now let's look at 22. Underline the number, look next door. 5 or higher, add 1 more. 4 or less, let it rest. Okay, 2 is definitely less than 4. That means we're going to let this 2 rest. It's going to stay the same. So the 2 stays the same. From the arrow on, change to zeros. So we've rounded both of these numbers to their greatest place. We rounded this to the hundreds place. We rounded this to the tens place. Now we can quickly multiply using our zeros rule, right? We cross off our zeros, pretend they're not even there. 4 times 2 is 8. However many zeros we crossed off, that's how many we have to add back at the end. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So 376 times 22 is about 8,000. Let's look at one more example. Okay, here we have 8,233 and 494. So again, our rule is that we need to round both numbers to their greatest place value. The greatest place value for this number is the thousands place. The greatest place value for this number is the hundreds place. Okay, so again, we're rounding this to the nearest 1,000. So we underline the number, look next door. 5 or higher, add 1 more. 4 or less, let it rest. Okay, 2 is less than 4. That means the 8 right here is going to rest. It's going to stay the same. So we write down our 8, from the arrow on, change to zeros. So 8,233 is closest to 8,000. It's closer to 8,000 than 9,000, right? We're rounding to the nearest 1,000. Okay, let's look at 494. We're rounding to the nearest hundreds place. So underline the number, look next door. Clearly this 9 is high, so we're going to add 1 more. The 4 becomes a 5. from the arrow on, change to zeros. So we can round 494 to 500. All right, now we're going to do some quick multiplication. Cross off our zeros, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we can multiply our fast fact. 8 times 5 is 40. And then we crossed off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros. So we need to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros back to this line. Okay, let's think about how do we know where to put our commas? We always start on the right and we move over. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Remember, there can never be more than 3 digits in each section because this is one period. This is another period, okay? So our answer is 4 million. So 8,233 times 494 is about 4 million. All right, good job, fourth grade.